Hello, guys. A few days ago, Ethiopia got to sign on onto a loan of up to $11 billion, and in this $11 billion, the country, of course, received some $3.5 billion of out of that money from, of course, the International Monetary Fund. Now, many countries, of course, have received monies from the International Monetary Fund, which is a dreaded institution by all standards on the African continent. But there is difference in how different African countries have been handling the International Monetary Fund. And of course, this institution has come to be looked at on the African continent as almost a necessary evil, as if there is no alternative, you know, uh, to its institution, to its kind of funding when we look at the African continent. But as we are going to see, uh, of course, the subject of today is not the IMF in itself, in its entirety and how it operates. We have dedicated a full video in some of the interactions we have had on here on Connect Africa. We have analyzed the Ethiopian situation itself, and we have analyzed, of course, the International Monetary Fund and World Bank themselves. Now, what we are talking about today is how the various heads of state interact with these institutions. Of course, we believe that it is not the only alternative there is that we have to deal with when it comes to continental financing and financing of projects on the African continent. As Pan Africanists, we believe there is another way. And that other way, of course, is the way of using our own finance as Africans to finance our projects because it is possible. But of course, the challenge which we are facing is uh, the way our ruling class is accustomed to free money, to easy money, to the point that they don't want to work for that money. So they are not willing to cut down on their expenses. They are not willing to downsize on their extravagant lives. So they think that the best way is, of course, to go to the International Monetary Fund, go to the IMF, and go to the World Bank to borrow this money and use it however they want. But to be realistic, one of the examples, of course, which you have given of recent is the Kenyan situation, where Kenya is looking for about $1.8 billion to finance the expansion of the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, right? But when we look at the Kenya's budget, annual budget is up to $8 billion. So in realistic terms, you can see that the money is there, which can be used to finance African projects, right? Now, but that is, like I said, not the topic today that we are going to be discussing. The topic that we are discussing today is basically how, when this money comes into these various countries, how it is handled, and these programs, how they are really handled by the various African countries. And of course, we are going to start with, the Prime Minister, Abiy of Ethiopia, and how he handled at this particular situation when it arose, the situation of interaction with the International Monetary Fund. Let me pull out an article which is which we are going to make reference to, of course. Now, during this period of the acceptance of IMF conditions, the Ethiopian government came out to negotiate with the International Monetary Fund. And during these negotiations, of course, the Ethiopian government had been very nationalistic, had been protective of its, the Ethiopian government had been protective of its economy, and even to the extent that during the first negotiations with the International Monetary Fund, those negotiations actually broke down. All right, the IMF, after visiting Ethiopia, it came out without a deal, right? So when it came out with a deal, then the Ethiopian, delegation, the Ethiopian government had then to tone down in how it was, I think, working. So somewhere along the line, they found each other, and they accepted a deal. And that deal, of course, involves a lot of things, which we broke down in one video. Now, that video shows us what, to an extent, or extensively shows us what is going to be touched And of course, that includes the financial sector within Ethiopia itself. And just to show you how important a financial sector is to a country, when you are talking about industrial revolution or industrializing a country, you need to control a couple of sectors. That includes, of course, communication. It includes energy, transportation, finance. All right, you need to take care of finance, and of course, you need to take care of your agriculture. These are very important. What you're eating, the energy you are using, the transportation system, because we're talking about industrialization, then communication, and then finance, because without financing, then you cannot industrialize. Now, the IMF sought to have Western institutions, or sought that Ethiopia should open up its financial institution, its landscape, financial sector, to other players from external, players outside, from external banks, from external institutions. It could be from the West, but I suspect that they want the neo-colonial institutions to come into Ethiopia, because Ethiopia has been kind of closed off financially from the other parts of the world, compared to other parts of the world. And of course, we know societies like China, of course, they closed off certain sectors in their country, that in these sectors, imperialist institutions cannot participate in these particular sectors. And of course, you can talk about energy, you can talk about transportation, you can talk about energy. I've spoken about energy. You can talk about communication, because these are key sectors that you cannot play with them. They are a matter of national security. So Ethiopia, in some way or somewhat, was behaving in this kind of way, that it had closed off certain sectors in this country, like communication and financial sector, to external players, and that is what we saw. Now, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, demanded that Ethiopia liberalizes. What they call liberalizing, basically, is allowing external players, so that the neo-colonial institutions can use this, of course, to penetrate into the country's sectors, and that includes communication. We saw Ethiopia opening up its communication sector, and we saw also the financial sector. We saw also Ethiopia opening up the financial sector. Now, it is through this financial sector that the prime minister, due to the love for his country, as we are seeing, the fact that he cares about his country, he came out to say something, that we are going to carry out reforms, but we, at the same time, we want to protect certain elements of our economy from external interference. Or if we are going to compete as a society, then we need to compete in a certain way. We need to be ready to position ourselves in a certain way. All right. And what we saw here is that he came and said to the country. All right. Let me go in. Okay. So, all right. So this is what the prime minister said to the country when they agreed to the International Monetary Fund conditions. This is what he said to the country. He said the prime minister also addressed the banking sector, advocating for consolidation. 37 banks. 37 banks in Ethiopia are too many. This is what he said. 37 banks in Ethiopia are too many because they are not functioning as true banks. They need to consolidate into 5 or 6 larger, more capable banks that are governed by business laws rather than ethnicity or local interest, he argued. In his speech, Abiy called for collective efforts to ensure the success of the reforms. The success or failure of these reforms lies in our hands. That is what he said, he stated, arguing, because they decided, this is what he said, we decided. So he said that the farmers, exporters, and the government, he urged them, farmers, exporters, and government, to work together. Income must increase, exports must increase, and production must increase. If this doesn't happen, the reforms will be at risk. Okay, so these were his comments. These were the comments of the prime minister. Now, whether the reforms succeed or not, what we want to point out here is how different heads of state deal with the issue of IMF conditions. So we are from East Africa now. That is where we went today to look at this. Now we want to look at another person. We want to look at another head of state and see how he dealt with this particular situation. All right. We want to deal with another head of state. Now, what this shows us actually is that while the IMF can give conditions, you as a head of state also you can try at least to push back to protect your own interests. And of course, it's talking about the increasing of exports, which of course is going to be very difficult. Looking at the fact that one of the reforms it involves allowing more imports into the country. All right, so it is going to be very difficult. So achieving against this International Monetary Fund and being successful under its guidance or its conditions is very difficult. So, but that is another issue. Now, what he did, what we are trying to point out is that what the Prime Minister Abiy did is actually, is something which shows that this person cares about his country. This person loves his country. In that, he called the banks which are smaller, which are 37, which he mentioned that there are 37 banks, and said that we are going to face challenges, that external players are going to come into the economy. But we do not want to destroy our local banks. Instead, try and merge. You guys need to merge yourself together so that you can be more powerful and compete with the external players who are coming. Because remember, this so-called privatization has been said for a very long time, that we need to privatize. We need to privatize this. We need to privatize that. Of course, to the interest of the Europeans in most cases. That's why we have privatized, because they have the money and we don't have enough money as Africans in many cases. That these industries, for example, financial sector or mining sector, they require they require a lot of capital, right, for you to invest in them. Okay, so this is what it means now, that the foreigners now they find themselves coming into our industry, whether it's the mining sector, and taking over. For example, you look at Africa's mining sector is dominated by foreigners, all right, because of the barriers to entry. All right, they are huge. You have a huge barrier to entry because of the capital that is required. Now, when you open up like that and you don't have your own local players, then you are opening yourself up for exploitation. And this also shows, even in the financial sector, that Ethiopia has decided to open up its country to financial players from external, from outside to come in and play in the economy. It means that you either have to have enough competitors within your country, you have to strengthen your own players so that they can be able to compete. And of course, this is what is worrying actually majority of the African countries, that they are not able, they invite these players who are big into the economy and they are not able to compete, okay, with these players who are bigger than our economies. And then this has left, of course, most of the African financial sector dominated by foreigners. If you go all over the continent, majority of the players in the financial sector are foreigners. And this creates problems. This creates huge problems, that you cannot now give low interest rates, loans to your people, businesses, certain businesses to conduct and to play within the country, and which creates, of course, a lot of problems and lack of growth within the economy. Now, of course, this requires us to have the power of the state as Africans, so that this state can represent the interests of us as Africans. The state has to represent us in this case, and of course, which the Western world always and always discourages. It discourages us to be, it discourages us from being represented by the state, and says that the state cannot play a part in the economy. It's the private sector. Leave everything to the private sector. Which, of course, people like Mwalimu Julius Nyerere warned us. Do not accept it. Do not accept this so-called leave it to the private sector. So this is what we saw, that Prime Minister Abiy, at least he is trying to protect, the Ethiopian financial sector by telling them that they should merge. They have to merge because of what is coming from the International Monetary Fund. Now, let us look at people like President Nana Addo of Ghana and what he did, because we wanted to compare and contrast between the two guys, to look at how different heads of state, have dealt with this particular problem. Now, when we come to West Africa, because we were in East Africa, okay. When we come to West Africa, so in West Africa, we are finding that uh, Akufo-Addo, the president of Ghana, who is a neoliberal president, instead of telling his banks to work together, to compound their effort, to come together, this man came up and collapsed all, the banks, and he claimed that he was carrying out a financial sector cleanup. All right. And what is surprising, in Ghana, it was done willingly. It was not under, all right. It was not under the International Monetary Fund. That is what is surprising, that it was willing, it was voluntary, that this particular government, even without the IMF or World Bank telling them that they should come and collapse their financial institutions, this particular government of Nana Addo came and collapsed the local banks by itself without the International Monetary Fund. Now, this, we brought it out so that you can see how different heads of state have dealt with these particular institutions. Now, let us read in some of the articles of what happened, of course, in Ghana. President Nana Addo, of course, came out in we are seeing in 2023 December. He came out and has given reasons for the financial sector cleanup. Now, even in this financial sector cleanup, actually itself, which he called that he wants to stabilize the economy, is questionable. All right, this cleanup, which he started in 2017, 2018, is questionable itself because it collapsed about, I think, about 9 banks, 7 to 9 banks, and also more than 300 small financial institutions, more than 300 small financial institutions. And as if that was not enough, this man used $1.3 billion, which is about 21 billion Ghana cedis, $1.3 billion, to say that he used that kind of money to clean up the financial sector. All right. He said that he got some, 21 billion. He called it some, which means it is very small, to do what he called cleaning up the financial sector. So many asked the question, if this man really understood what he's doing and his government, and he really loves the African people, because what we have realized recent is that most of the African heads of state are working against the African continent. They are working for foreign powers. They are working for foreign forces. And of course, that's the imperialistic forces, including the United States. And we have seen people like Nana Addo, how he turned himself around after coming with some sort of Pan-African rhetoric. And we saw Ruto is the same journey he took, that after coming with some Pan-African rhetoric, turned against the people and started implementing IMF, policies. But what is worse with Nana Addo, he did not even turn around himself. He immediately started with these, neoliberal policies without even the IMF pushing him to do it. Maybe you could say that Ruto is being pushed or something. So he used $1.3 billion to do what he called, what he termed as a financial sector cleanup. All right, he used 1.3 billion, $1.3 billion, which is 21 billion Ghana cedis, right? And people now asked questions. Why didn't he use this money? All right. Why didn't he use this money to refinance the banks? Why didn't we ask these banks to come together and then we can recapitalize these banks instead of collapsing them? So this is the question which many people of sense, of course, asked. And really, it makes sense, because later on what would happen is that the same man, President Nana Addo, went to Europe to bring another bank from the European Investment Bank, and they planted it in Ghana. All right. And that bank was capitalized with just $170 million. So now this is where, of course, you see that these people are not working in the interest of the African people. They are not interested. These people are not really interested in working for the interests of the African people. So the banks, as we're seeing, of course, Akufo-Addo appeared and justified these actions, right? Akufo-Addo appeared and justified these actions to the public of what he did. And let us look at even at what he said for us to be able to understand this very well. So the president said the banks were unsustainable. They were unsustainable artificial life support. Therefore, a radical intervention. This is what he calls radical intervention. The expenditure of $1.3 billion. This is not $1 million. It's $1 billion in what he termed, a radical intervention. This is the radical intervention. We needed a radical intervention to save the entire financial sector. That is his claim. What did he do? The supervisors, what was realized also is that the supervisory departments of the central bank were unfortunately not performing their duties. We are in a disparate situation, that is what he said, and urgent radical measures had to be taken to prevent the collapse of both the financial and banking sectors. The consequences were too dire. This is how he justified. Now, the Bank of Ghana, under the new leadership, intervened. Of course, that is what he's saying. Intervened and restored sanity in this, and restored sanity in the sector, and in the process saved the banks and the funds of 4.6 million depositors. Okay, the government found some. This is where it is very, very painful when you hear a president saying this. He's saying that the government found some 21 billion cedis, which is of course $1.3 billion to fund the cleaning up exercise, which has enabled a more robust financial and banking services sector to emerge better to finance the rapid development of our growth. We know, of course, up from this period, Ghana has been facing problems. He said to rapidly finance the growth. Now, where is the growth itself? We do not see it that, because Ghana's economy has rapidly gone down, right? It has rapidly gone down. Now, what we are seeing is that, again, is that for Akufo-Addo, even before the International Monetary Fund came to put up conditions, he had already, he had already imposed conditions on himself. He had already imposed the conditions on his people, which ripened the collapse of the financial sector, because he started this in 2017, 2018. Now, when you collapse local banks, where do you expect people to get business? Where do you expect people to get low interest loans from? Where do you expect them, to get those loans? All right, and you use $1.3 billion to do what you are calling financial sector cleanup. Why not encourage? Why not bring experts? Because we have experts within these countries, but these experts are normally pushed to the side and they are not concerned. Why not, invite these experts and tell them, help us to merge these banks, like what we are seeing in Ethiopia, what the Prime Minister is trying to say in Ethiopia, to the banks in Ethiopia, that they should merge. But of course, by the end of 2018, he's saying that they had closed down nine banks. 9 banks were closed down. 23 savings and loans institutions, they were closed down. Basically collapsed. That is what he's saying. We had collapsed 9 banks. We had collapsed 23 savings and loans institutions, and we had collapsed 347 microfinance institutions. All right, that is what the current, governor of the Bank of Ghana said. Now, he said that the 9 banks that were collapsed during the financial sector, what he calls the financial sector cleanup, were UT Bank, Capital Bank, Unibank, the Royal Bank, the Beach Bank, Sovereign Bank, the Construction Bank, Premium Bank, and Heritage Bank. Now, of course, all these were traditional institutions, were local banks, all right, which are used to give the local businesses capital for them to operate. So regardless of the problems that the country was facing, it was not justifiable to close down at the banks, as we are seeing the approach from other sides, of the continent, like in Ethiopia, what is happening there. And it's very important, I think, that we learn from each other. Now, after closing the banks, what did this man do? Let us look at it. Let us look at what the man did after closing down the banks. He went to Europe. Okay, after closing down the banks, this man, without a shame, he went to Europe. And this is what shows you how imperialism is working really. Okay. This is the European Union Investment Bank. This is their website. This is their website. That's where I am. What are they saying now? All right. What are they saying on the European Investment Bank website? President Akufo-Addo welcomes euro 170 million. This is equivalent almost to 170 million. It's the same. EIB support for new National Development Bank of Ghana. All right. So this is somebody who spent $1.3 billion to collapse banks instead of recapitalizing them or merging, having them merge. Spent $1.3 billion. Now he has gone to Europe to beg for $170 million. So then you ask, these people, do they think? Or they think, but there is some heavy force that is forcing them to move in a way that they are moving, whereby they are continuing to impoverish the African people. So they are saying that Akufo-Addo of Ghana, Wana Hoya, president of the European Investment Bank, and Thomas Ostorius, vice president, today formally agreed. And this came after collapsing. This came after collapsing, 2 years after him collapsing the local banks. Now they in a European bank. And this is where I'm trying to show you that imperialism, how it works, it wants to embed and control everything, control the mining sector in Africa, control the infrastructure, control the financial sector, and it is being aided by people like him, people like Akufo-Addo, who is clearly a puppet, and you can conclude that he doesn't know what he's doing. All right? Either he doesn't know what he's doing, or he deliberately he knows what he's doing, and he's imposing these neo-colonial policies on the people so that the people can continue to suffer, so that the business can collapse. As we have seen that all his policies brought a lot of collapse within the country. Now, they agreed that 170 million European Investment Bank backing for the new National Bank, National Development Bank of Ghana. So what is disturbing again here is this, is that these banks, these European banks, when they come, they look at themselves and they name themselves, they Christian themselves, names which look like their African names. Like, for example, if you say National Development Bank of Ghana, you may think that this bank belongs to the Africans, which is interesting. So the EIB backing represents the largest ever engagement in Ghana by the world's largest international public bank, a most significant support for the national development, for a national development institution in Africa. So they are saying that 170 million is so huge money, and his largest engagement is a big engagement to make it look like it makes sense. So this in itself, what we are seeing is the different heads of state and how they engage with these institutions. And so this is what we definitely wanted to bring out to make contrast and show how Ethiopia is dealing with this particular situation compared to how Ghana is dealing with the same situation, and of course the different heads of state. When we say Ghana or Ethiopia, you may think that we are talking about the citizens themselves, but of course the heads of state themselves, how they are dealing with these particular situations, and we see that it is different with different heads of state, how they have dealt with these banking crisis or reforms, whatever you call it, in these particular countries. But anyway, what do you think about how Prime Minister Abiy and also Nanado has dealt with this issue of financial reforms within their respective countries? Please put that in the comment section. Put your suggestions in the comment section and like the video. I ask you to like the video and share it with others as a platform. We are glad that you are continuing to support Connect Africa and you are continuing to hang in there with us. We really appreciate that, and we don't take it for granted. Thank you so much for being part of us, and peace to you. I will talk to you later. Thank you so much.